Joining me now for Locked On Gators is Gabriella Lewis, and we're talking women's basketball for the Florida Gators. We did this a lot last year. We had Howard Megdal, who you know, of course, with the next. We had him here, and we've had a few Gators women's basketball players here. And one person I tried getting is the head coach, Kelly Rae Finley. That hasn't happened yet. Yeah, I'm going to make it happen. It just hasn't happened yet. But now with women's basketball tipping off. I want to say kicking off all the time because I'm a football
Right, of
guy, but
course.
with it tipping off now, this has to be the first question. I think Kelly Rae Finley, obviously, everybody that has ever said anything about her that I've heard has been a positive thing about her. It was clear last season that with everything going on with the coaching change and her being the interim, she still had this entire roster bought in. They made a deeper run than we anticipated earlier in the season. They dropped the interim tag. She's had a full off season under her belt now. And I know she's been doing her thing recruiting wise, traveling and all that. But what are the expectations here for the Florida Gators in now her first year as the permanent head coach?
Yeah, I think this is a really exciting time for Florida. Also, first of all, thank you for having me on. Excited to talk
Of
more.
course.
But yeah, I think this is a really exciting time. And I think it's exciting because of Kelly Rae Finley. I mean, I was at SEC Media Day a couple weeks ago. I spoke to every team, every coach, and many players. And, you know, there were a couple teams that especially stood out, and especially teams that stood out where they beloved their coach. And I think Florida was at the top of that list. Of the players I spoke to, Faith Dute and Nina Rickards, both of them were head over heels for Finley. And I think that is a really, really special thing to see in a team. And then also you could just kind of see it. She protected her players. She really made sure that they were doing okay. And she spoke very highly of her players. And she's also just extremely humble and seems like she really understands it. And so I think when you see players who are that bought in, and I think you said this earlier, to me, Florida has extremely high buy-in, and it's really tough to win when you don't have extremely high buy-in, even if you don't have as much talent. And they are definitely a talented team, but they're outranked in a number of ways, I would say. But what's important is that they really care, and they have, I think, the mental component of it there. And I think dropping that interim tag for Kelly Rae Finley was one of the smartest decisions they could have made, because she really seems like she has a great focus with this team, a great bond with this team, and also I think has the future in mind in a really important way. Because to me, the way I see this season is, they may not win a chip this year, but they have the potential in the future, and that's very exciting with someone like this at the helm.
Yeah, I apologize if I get her name wrong. LSU Kim Mulkey, I think is
Mm-hmm.
her name.
Yes.
She was one where even during the season, while Kelly Rae Finley still had the interim tag, Kim Mulkey was at a press conference. She was just like, "I'm not putting up for a friend, but if they don't drop that interim title soon, someone's going to give her a lot of money to be their next head coach." So I'm glad that Florida
Yeah.
Scott Strickland, kind of woke up and made it happen. And you mentioned Nina Rickards, which, if anybody has listened to this show before when I've talked about women's basketball, Nina Rickards is my favorite player on this team.
Mm-hmm.
It's her and Zippy Broughton. They're my favorite players here. And I have to ask this question, especially about Nina Rickards, because she's from Queens, I'm from Queens, and I'm just like, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I need her to be great now. What are your thoughts on her going into the season, kind of taking that next step where I feel like she's like I don't want to say an everything player, but she scores, she passes, she's a leading rebounder. As small as she is compared to the rest of the players on the court,
Right.
she's a leading rebounder. So what are kind of the expectations now, where you have someone like Kiki Smith is gone, Zippy Broughton
Right.
is out for the year, and she's kind of the next woman up?
Yeah, I think she's so solid, right? She's kind of solid in every part of her game, and that's really exciting to see. Having a player that you can rely on like that is really important. And she's a senior, which in a lot of places that doesn't make you, the oldest player on the team, or the most experienced. But in Florida's not the youngest team, but it is a little bit, right? Because we're in this transfer madness where so many people are graduate students, and if you look at the roster in Florida, like seniors are definitely, older players. So I think she has this leadership component. And I spoke to her at SEC Media Day, and she also just has the composure, it really seems, to be a leader, that she really cares about this team. And I, like I said, they all have high buy-in, right? Like everyone really seems to care. And so I definitely think that she on the court brings a solid mentality, but then I think off the court also is going to be a really important part of this. And, with Florida loses a lot of their leading scorers last year, and I'm sure we may get into this a little bit more, but they lose Lavender Briggs, who's the second leading scorer last year, Kara Smith, who joined the WNBA Draft, first leading scorer, and then Zippy Broughton, and she was the third leading scorer, right? So you need more components offensively. And so I think Nina Rickards has a really big opportunity to step up this year. And, also being a senior, looking at you may be trying to join the draft next year, if not the year after that. So that's another really important component. And, I think she does definitely have something to prove and could really have a breakout year.
Yeah, and I mean, we'll get into this now. We were going to do it a little bit later, but
Mm-hmm.
with all of this roster turnover, I told you before we started recording, I was like, I haven't done off seasons really
Mm-hmm.
before, but I feel like there's been a lot of turnover on this team. Just even looking at the roster, I'm like, half of these names did not, they would occasionally rotate in, but they were not consistent contributors, consistent
Mm-hmm.
minute eaters. This year they're going to be, and that's kind of,
Yeah.
terrifying, but also very promising when you're just looking at this from a fan point of view. So,
Mm-hmm.
how difficult is it going to be to kind of get this team right for this year for
Yeah.
Kelly Finley?
Yeah. I think the elephant in the room is you lose Lavender Briggs, and Lavender Briggs she went to Maryland, and she's a very good player, right? Like losing her is losing some serious talent. But looking at this team, I think you lose talent, and you lose a lot of scoring when it comes to other folks, as well as also just injury with Zippy, etc. But then you also bring in a lot of talent. So Aaliyah Matheru, KK Deans, Leilani Correa, and Rashea Kyle, apologies if I've mispronounced any of those names, all come in out of the transfer portal. And a lot of those players are really, really solid, especially offensively, they're solid. Um, you know, KK Deans is just like a very consistent scorer, such a good get. Leilani Correa comes from St. John's last year, averaging 17 a game. Like that's a big get right there. So I think they've done very well in the transfer portal. I'm calling right now transfer madness, just because every team, basically, especially in the SEC, has got 4 or 5 players that are coming both in and out, and that's we've never seen that until now. We've seen some transfer, last year, but obviously this was just this historical year, and I don't think it's going to slow down. And so I think every team is going to be dealing with this in a little bit, of how did they reconstruct? How do they do this? And if you have poor team culture, I do think it's tough to reconstruct. But where I'm confident for Florida is they have, it seems like, a really strong core of people who have stayed. And then they have newer players who I think can initiate into that system well. And also, Florida's schedule is not that difficult in the beginning of the season until it gets into SEC play. I think they've got some games and they've got some wiggle room to be able to really, figure their system out. In their most recent exhibition, they did pretty well, and I think they're going to have a pretty good game starting this week. So they definitely, I think, will have some difficulties there with the turnover and some of the people they lost. But I have a lot of confidence out of what they gained out of the portal.
The Florida Gators are currently 24-point favorites against Stony Brook tomorrow night. I'm telling you, I have no idea what I should be betting, but I'm betting that they will cover the spread just because, let's do it. Let's let it ride. Why not? Make sure you check out BetOnline. They've got basketball, football. I mean, there's right now you're in that perfect like sports equinox, what they call it. Baseball just ended, but you can bet on so many sports. So check out BetOnline. It's where the game starts. As the sun comes out, and well, now it's going back away, but small businesses are back in business. Life is looking better again, right? LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier for you to grow your team. LinkedIn Jobs makes it easy for you to find the people that you want to interview, maybe hire, because with, like screening questions, you can kind of narrow that list down and prioritize who you want to look to. You're busy, It's called a business because you're busy. You can't spend your time looking through all the non-qualifiers, we'll say. But I mean, don't take my word for it. Every week, nearly 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn. They're looking there for a reason. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about the portal a bit, and that's something that just it blows my mind in every sport how consistent. There's so much turnover now because of the
Mhm.
portal. And Florida, I mean, for years has brought in talent. I mean, Zippy Broughton, we talked about,
Right.
she's came from Rutgers initially. So
Mhm.
the portal has helped Florida more than it's hurt Florida, I think. Obviously, Lavender Briggs going to Maryland sucks. That happened before even the end of the season last year. She was like,
Right.
hey, like I'm leaving after the injury. Um, and how difficult is it? Because I know how difficult it is in football. I know how difficult it is in
Mhm.
men's basketball. I do not know how difficult it is in women's basketball to consistently build a team when there's something like the transfer portal where you could have one freshman go, I didn't like the playing time I got this year, I'm out. And how difficult is it to kind of find a balance between high school players, grad transfers, or non grad transfers, and actually build a consistent contender? Because obviously that's the goal for Florida. Like
Mhm.
I don't know I don't know if you're a fan of any team, but I know that us Gators fans, we have high expectations
Mhm.
every year in every sport. So the
Yeah.
goal, build a consistent contender. How do you really manage that with the portal being able to completely build or demolish a team in 1 year?
Such a good question, and I think about this all the time, and I've been thinking about this a lot recently of, like, in 1 year, you could lose everything, and that's a scary thought, I think, and I think, I'm sure coaches are a little bit on edge, and so, uh, my thing about Florida that I think sets them apart is you have a coach who people really like, and hopefully it'll stay that way, and is young and is exciting, and so that's very attractive, and I think people will stay because of that. I think in the transfer portal, a coach who knows what they're doing and who is exciting and who is well known as being well liked is invaluable. And then also, I think Florida as a state, it's really important here. So, it's just really important for them because there's so much talent within the state, and people wanna stay at home, right? Ideally, they don't have to go across the country. Ideally, they don't have to get on a plane, right? If they can drive a couple hours, if their family can be there all the time, that's a game changer. And I think, places like UConn have seen this for a long time, right? They recruit extremely well from the entire Northeast. And if Florida can build a program that's a contender, that's consistently good, that is really, builds up to something, they, I think, are already worlds ahead of people because there's so much talent in basketball coming out of Florida. And this is something that one of my colleagues, Missy Heidrich, and I have spoken about. If they can build that in Florida, and if Kelly Rae Finley can build that up, and they have an ability to just kind of pick from their backyard, they are going to be a serious contender. And so I think it's kind of getting to that place. And I asked Kelly Rae Finley about this at SEC Media Day. I asked, does it feel like you're on the precipice of something huge? And when that comes to, transferring, and she's extremely modest, and her players were like, yeah, we're on the precipice of this program becoming extremely incredible. And she was like, now we need to actually show what we're made of to be, to really show that we're getting there. But I think Florida is on the verge of something really incredible, and there's some other teams in the SEC and across the country that are doing the same, but I think Florida is gonna be a name to watch not only this year, but down the line.
Yeah, we had you mentioned Kelly Rae Finley. She is known for being modest, and
Mhm.
her players, not that they're not modest, but
Yeah,
they're pretty
they're
confident.
honest.
Like,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and it's like we've had Nina on the show, we've had Zippy
Mhm,
on the show, and we've had KK Deans on the show, and pretty much all of them have been like, yeah, no, like, we're trying to win a championship, which I
yeah,
love because
yeah.
I don't know what it is, if it's like being a competitive person, but I love it where you go, don't care who's on the roster,
Mhm,
don't care who we're going against. The goal every game is to win that thing and win it handedly. And I love that the
mhm.
roster is like, yeah, no, we're shooting for a championship immediately. That's confidence that you can't find anywhere, and you can't fake it either. So I'm looking forward to seeing that get put onto the court. And I mean, one player that I wanted to touch on that I'm looking for the next step is Alberto Rendal. Last year, she was a
Mhm,
freshman. She was more so a spot up shooter than anything else. She wasn't even the type that would really take the open lane if it was there. How do you kind of speed up her progression a little bit, is what I think they have to do, or what should be the next step for her where she needs to take on a bigger role now? She's one of the few people who have now or will be in this program for a second year that's actually going to be playing, because Zippy's been here for a bit, but not going to be able to play for the season.
Right. Yeah. No, I think she's exciting. I believe the first ever player out of Denmark for this program. Average, not crazy numbers, but decent for a freshman. And so I think how you speed that up is she's forced to be in that role, right? Like, they'll still have scorers, they'll still have people who are important, but like you said, coming being one of the few returners, I think, you know, is going to actually have a ton of help for her, showing people around, being a welcoming force. And if she can continue to, be important on the court and kind of progress and put in that work, I think she absolutely has the ability to really become a core part of this team, and how in playing and minutes, etc. And I think she's a good example of that progression in Florida and in a lot of places. That freshman to sophomore mentality of you're one of the few returners, and it's really now time where you can kind of have a breakout season. And I think that's, I mean, obviously the hope for Florida fans is that she does that. And I think she definitely has the potential. And also, I'm sure she needed some time to find her footing, and hopefully she'll be able to find that now as well.
Yeah, and you touched on this before, where to start the year, Florida's schedule not the strongest.
Hmm.
Which I think, and I think we can agree, it's a good thing, especially when you're trying to find your footing with all this roster turnover.
Hmm.
But how much of an advantage is it to have such a light schedule early on, where looking at it, Florida has no ranked games until, or obviously rankings will change, but no ranked games right now until December 21st when they take on Oklahoma in the Jumpman Invitational. Like you
Yeah.
have a month and a half of not light games, but no insane challenges.
Yeah, I think you can argue a tougher schedule or an easier schedule, at least in the beginning. What's better till you're blue in the face? But when you're in the SEC, I don't think it's that bad of a thing, right? Like their entire second half of their season is going to be tough. I mean, almost every team in the SEC in women's basketball are pretty tough competitors, and you have three teams in the SEC that are, you know, likely going to be ranked the entire year, if not more than that. And so I think, yeah, hopefully they spend a month or two finding their footing, kind of figuring out who plays best where and how the rotations fall. And then they're going to have, it's going to be a little bit of trial by fire after that. And so I think, yeah, I definitely think that could help them. It concerns me a little bit, right? If you haven't been challenged a ton in that first half, but like I said, I think they're inevitably going to be challenged because that's what the SEC is all about.
And I'm going to let you go in a minute. I just want just
Yeah.
one more question for you, where you had your SEC preview come out, which
Mhm.
I'll include a link in the description for people who want to read it. You had Florida, the projection finishing sixth in the SEC. What kind of went into that evaluation to them being sixth? And I mean, I don't, again, I don't know to be like, oh, they should be higher or lower, but what kind of went into that evaluation saying, hey, like six is where they realistically should be?
Yeah, so media put them at 6, and then coaches put them at number 7th in the SEC. And, to be honest, and this is something that I think a lot of media is feeling, a lot of coaches are feeling, Mike Neighbors of Arkansas said it perfectly. He goes, "The top 3, which are LSU, Tennessee, South Carolina, I think anyone can tell you that's what the top 3 is gonna be. I don't know how you figure out the rest of them." And I kind of agree with that. I really think a lot of this is a crapshoot. But I think Florida, some of these teams are really in their rebuild years. I don't think they're going to make a turn. They're not going to make the March Madness tournament. Florida, is at that middle point, and I think that shows them that it's kind of good between the rankings of, like I said, I think they made the March Madness tournament last year. I think they absolutely have the potential and potentially even the expectation to do that again. I think they absolutely can. And so they're kind of in that higher end in that way. But I definitely think there's still a lot of unknowns, like we've discussed today. There's plenty of things that we don't really know how they're going to work out. And, you can only hope for success for a team. But with the transfer portal and all these other teams, really who knows? But they haven't been nationally ranked by basically anyone. So we'll see. Again, the SEC is competitive. Even if you're good in the SEC, or even if you're mediocre in the SEC, you're good nationwide. And so I think even being at that sixth spot in the SEC is going to be good for them in a potential postseason run.
All right, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to be looking forward to it.
Yeah.
Like I told you before we recorded, I was like, I've never been this excited for women's basketball for the Gators, so I can't wait for it. Thank you so much, Gabrielle.
Yeah.
This is Gabrielle Lewis, and you'll be back, so don't worry
Thank
about
you.
that. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thank you so much.